Hey, all you space cats. Welcome to the Black Hole Podcast, Season 7, Episode 29. I'm your host, Mitch Miller. I am the most neutral person in the world, the most transparent candidate on the presidential ballot, and I'm also a free market entrepreneur and an underground artist. So, over Season 6 of this podcast and this current Season 7, I've been making the case that corporate communists, a communist regime, has taken over the United States of America. They've seized control of the United States of America beginning as far back as the 1950s. And we currently live under a corporate communist regime. And if you don't believe that, if you don't want to believe this, if it turns your worldview upside down, let me just summarize it as simply as possible, right? If a businessman takes all or most of the jobs in his supply chain and transitions those jobs to communist factories, isn't that businessman a communist? Isn't he a communist? Let's call a snake, right? If you're afraid to call that businessman a communist, if you're afraid to stand up to these communists, it just proves further that this is an oppressive communist regime, right? If you fear the consequences of standing up to these corporate communists, it proves that this is a oppressive corporate communist regime. So that's as simple as I can put it, right? Since the 80s, we've definitely been taking most of the U.S. jobs and putting them in communist and communist-leading countries in their factories. You can't deny this. So call these business people communists, because that's what they are. So I want to talk a little bit about my t-shirt sales over the 4th of July weekend. I set up at the barn, like I said, and sold my campaign t-shirts. There's no Canton American. I also sold Black Hole Podcast t-shirts and Make Duels Not War t-shirts. I sold one Make Duels Not War t-shirt to a guy that used to work with me, Ben, childhood. We grew up together in Utica. Great guy, and I appreciate that sale because that money will be used. We have $20 so far going towards building the duel.us website that I've discussed in previous episodes. I sold 2 Black Hole Podcast shirts. Now it takes $10 to make these shirts, so I netted $20 towards the cause of the Black Hole Podcast. So since 2019, 5 years of this podcast, paying $144 a year to host this podcast, I've recouped $20. So that's good. I know I said I had sponsors on previous episodes, but they were just friends' businesses that I was promoting. And that's important because YouTube, now that my podcast is on YouTube, they want to know if you have sponsors and they want you to report it to them if it's in your episodes. My sponsors never paid me any actual income towards the podcast. They just supported me in other ways. And we sold 5 there's no Canton American shirts, so that's $50 towards the campaign. If you have any suggestions on what I should do with that $50 for the campaign for president, please email me and I'll take them into consideration. Trying to be as transparent as possible. Now, initially these shirts were supposed to be for a solar project, and I did collect $120 or $140. I'll have to look at my notes towards those solar projects, and that'll still go towards solar projects on the farm. But we transitioned these shirts. I think it makes more sense for them to be campaign t-shirts. So now this new, I promoted it when I sold them, these are my campaign shirts. So now I feel okay using this money for the campaign. All right. So I talked about correctives on the last podcast. These are like collectives, like artist collectives in each city that I'm trying to coordinate. I call them correctives because the corporate communists, even though they're communists, they like to label other things communist, like a collective, to get you to shy away from them and keep utilizing their dictator-style businesses, because that's the only way you should do business, right? I don't believe in this. I'm a free market entrepreneur. I think different management styles, and that's what we're talking about, different management styles, whether it's a collective and it's managed by all of the collective artists, whether it's a co-op and it's co-operated by all the employees. However your management style is, I believe in a free market, there's room for all management styles, and you shouldn't shy away from these things. You should embrace all management styles of business and not just stick with the corporate structure. That's what a free market means. It means more freedom for people and a better business culture in general. So another idea for my correctives, I said I have many ideas. Some I'll put on this podcast. Others I'll wait until someone contacts me. Another idea for these correctives has to do with the trafnet.org website I have and maintain. That was for a traffic streamlining project using cart magnets. That's a whole season of this podcast. But I have this website. I have other projects up on it, and I'm going to start at some point in the future to deploy a new strategy. And these correctives could also fund a trafnet.org, say trafnetaustin.org website, or trafnet New York City.org website. You maintain a website through GoDaddy for around $200, domain name, website. And what we'll do with these websites is all activities that cause traffic in a city. Sporting events, concerts, art festivals, we will post those, what days they're on, what's happening each day. Each morning when you go on the website, you take an hour, you search through all the city, different sporting teams and stuff, websites, collect all that information, put it on one website, trafnet.org, in whatever city, and you post it, and people can go to that website. So if they're going to go out to get groceries, they can see what the traffic's going to be like, right? Where they should avoid, and so on and so forth. And this can be eventually bumped up to a daily email, right? There's ways to go through. I know with GoDaddy you can do an email list and things like that, so we can explore those options. But it sticks true to the TrafNet original idea of streamlining traffic, car traffic through cities. And who knows, maybe even Pete Buttigieg will give us some grants to maintain these websites. But that's one idea for these correctives, these city-by-city correctives. And we can have other pages on that. The main page will show the traffic, the events happening that day. But you could have other pages with our t-shirts for sale, any projects, links to the Pittsburgh street art or whatever city street art groups, things like that. And look, there's a lot of scammers out there on the internet, right? And these scammers target big tech firms, like your social media firms. But if we roll out our platforms, our social media, our different platforms, city by city, there'll be less room for scammers, right? So that's some ideas I have. Okay, I want to move on to urine testing for welfare recipients, right? There's talk among one side of the communist regime about urine testing people who receive welfare benefits in the United States of America. Now, as president, I would sign a bill that does this, right? But I have stipulations. There must be also other two added strategies with this bill. Number one, the most important one, is lifetime financial monitoring for elected officials. I've said this before on a previous episode. Elected officials, if you're elected to a government position, you should only receive the yearly salary based off of the taxpayers. That's it. No gifts, no additional funds. You should be able to live off of that salary and live comfortably. And you shouldn't be enjoying lavish travel from your campaign donations, right? We have the technology to limit this greatly. So I don't think you should be enjoying lavish travel or any other gifts through your campaign donations and funding, right? You should live off of that salary. You're a public servant, and that's all you should get. The Greeks who invented or who founded democracy, right? I saw a thing on social media, and I don't know if this is true. I tried to look into it a little bit, but I didn't find much. The Greeks who founded democracy, this social media post said, their politicians had a 1-year term. And they took note of the finances of that politician at the beginning of that term, and they took note of the finances of that politician at the end of their 1-year term. And if there were any discrepancies, they were executed. Now, I'm not suggesting execution. Instead of an execution, I'm suggesting lifetime monitoring of elected officials' bank accounts. Every elected official and their spouse will have their bank accounts monitored for the rest of their life. If they're handed a lucrative job after their term in the government, it'll be reported to the public, and if we have a platform like Periscope, the public can vote on sanctions and penalties for taking a cushy job after serving on a government that was supposed to regulate that company. You took a job with them, made millions of dollars on a board or as an executive in that company or a consultant, however you break it down. That'll all be reported. Transparency in the government, that's what I'm for. And look, this isn't a huge hardship. As a general rule of thumb, if you and your spouse can each make equal to what the President of the United States makes, and you'll be okay, right? That's a general rule of thumb. And that's a pretty comfortable lifestyle. So, if you don't like it, don't run for office, right? This is a call out to the public and elected officials. You will be monitored for life because you are elected into a government position, and that government position allows for a certain amount of power, and with that power, people want to give you gifts, payoffs, payouts, bribes, however you want to put it. You should only take your salary, nothing else, and that's end of story. So that's what I bring to the table. You want to end government corruption, vote for Mitch Miller for president. Now, a businessman, right? We all want a businessman to run the government, right? A free market entrepreneur like myself, we're responsible to the workers, to the consumers. That's how a free market becomes strong. A businessman is responsible to investors. And they're going to try, if a businessman runs the government, they're going to try to cut costs by denying pensions, right? This has happened for 50 years. Think about how many people lost their pensions because corporations strategically filed bankruptcy so that people did not have their pensions. This has happened. That's what happens when businessmen run the government as well. They don't care about your pension. They don't care about your retirement. They care about the bottom line and return to investors. So in this bill, this urine testing for welfare, this lifetime monitoring for government officials, I also would suggest a bill for federal workers, right? Federal workers get randomly urine tested. They can be randomly urine tested and terminated, hypothetically, based off of that. If you're a federal employee and you're 5 years from retirement and you test positive for marijuana in a random drug test, we're not going to take your pension, right? Now, the businessman is going to strategically roll out these random urine tests a year before retirement and try to deny the pension. We're not going to do that. We're going to codify this into law, into a bill. I'll sign it. Other drugs, if you test positive, we're going to keep the same termination policy that the federal government has, but marijuana won't carry the same penalty. You won't be terminated solely for testing positive for marijuana if you're within 5 years of retirement, but you may have to have to go to treatment, rehab, things like that. So I'm not sure what the policy is right now currently. It might be similar, but we're going to make sure it is. So those three things would be on a bill if you're going to urine test welfare recipients. Number one, we'll roll out a strategy to urine test welfare recipients. Number two, lifetime financial monitoring for all elected government officials. And number three, if you're within 5 years of retirement from the federal government, we're not going to take away your pension if you test positive for marijuana. Now, the 15 years before that, when you're not close to retirement, we can keep the same policy. However, that comes out through Congress if they write this bill. So I want to thank you for listening and vote for Mitch Miller for President of the United States. Until next time, I wish you peace, prosperity, and homeostasis.